Hello class and welcome to our second CSS tutorial. Unlike the other tutorials that we've been doing together over the last several weeks, I actually want you guys this week to begin where you left off last week. So go find your CSS file that you're working on last week. It should be your name in CSS and a number 1 there. I don't have a 1 there, but that's okay. You should have a 1 there. And go back to this file because we're just going to keep playing around with it and adding stuff to it. We'll do a final thing next week to sort of clean things up. And then remember, your final group project is to have a website for your group, for whatever group company you guys started clear back in January. So before we get going, let me just go over some things because some of you struggled this week with some things. The first thing to go over is that computer coding is very specific. That means if you get one little thing wrong, then the whole program won't run. And so, I'm just going to point to some things that some people get wrong and some of you have gotten wrong. The first is these brackets. These brackets right here, these curly brackets, are very important. CSS is what we call white space neutral, which means if we put everything on one line of code, it will still run. CSS does not understand enters and spaces and tabs. So right now, I've just condensed my first division into one line of code, and I'm going to hit run, and you're going to see that nothing changes down there. See, nothing changes. In fact, these 2018 lines of code, 19 lines of code, can all be on line 1, and it will still run. So in programming languages, the reason that we have to have these semicolons, and there should be a semicolon here. That's kind of interesting. No, there actually shouldn't. Sorry. So in computer coding, because computer coding doesn't understand white space, it doesn't understand enters and spaces and tabs, what we have to do is use these symbols to tell the computer program that something else is about to happen. So curly brackets are the ways in computer programming language that we tell the computer start a new division and stop that division right here. If you do not have these brackets around every division, then the program won't run. The next thing that marks commands off from each other is semicolons. So every line that is a command to the program or a command that the program has to follow out needs a semicolon at the end of it. So here we have named a division. You do not need a semicolon right here because you're naming the division. And then we've said start division, and then command 1, end with a semicolon, command 2, end with a semicolon, end division. With that said, the human eye is not white space neutral. Computer programs are. The human eye isn't. And so for the human eye, for any humans that might be looking at your program, including your teacher and your teammates, if you are still working in a team for this project, it is important that you divide your divisions up so that they can be easily seen. The way to do that is a title. So you have a title. So my title's HTML, no semicolon because that's the title. Then begin division, and then command 1 on one line, command 2 on the second line, both ending with semicolons right there, and then end the division, and then enter, put line 6 as a blank line of code. Keep that blank. Don't run your code together, and then Kevin is the next one. We're going to get to the capital K there in a second or two. Start the Kevin division, command 1, 2, 3 with semicolons at the end, end the Kevin division, empty line, box 1. That way the human eye can look at this and see each division very clearly. Your eye could just see it. The computer program doesn't care about this. The computer program cares about the curly brackets and the semicolons, but the human eye does care about that. And if you're ever working for a boss someday and your boss loads your code to try to figure out what the heck you were doing, they're going to be very mad at you if this is all scrunched together. Scrumbled is almost the word I said. I think I just made up a new word there. Scrumbled together. They call that spaghetti code, by the way, and it's awful and everybody hates it. So just make sure your code is nice and clean. That's going to help you out too. Make sure you have your semicolons or curly brackets for the computer. Make sure you have your divisions divided up for any humans that might be looking at this. So with that said, let's go back over before we get to how to make a menu pane. Let's go back over your CSS page. This is your CSS page. By the way, CSS is not HTML. HTML is completely different. So only on your CSS page do you use these curly brackets or these semicolons. If I see these curly brackets and semicolons on your HTML page, then I'll just know you didn't watch this lecture at all. So let me go over this style page again and just kind of try to explain to you again what's going on. So first of all, our first division is anything that's HTML, which is everything on your web page. So anything with an HTML tag or inside of an HTML tag should have this background picture, which you see down here. No repeat, center fixed, meaning just the picture itself, no gridding it, anything like that. And it should cover the whole page no matter how big the page is. So then I created a division called Kevin with a capital K. Capital letters and lowercase letters are very important for a computer. In the computer's mind, capital Kevin and lowercase Kevin are two entirely different things having nothing in common. So if it's capital K here, it needs to be capital K everywhere else. And I said anything that's labeled Kevin or tagged with Kevin in HTML needs to be red font. It needs to be 20 pixels from the left margin of whatever division it's in and a 45 pixel font size, which is right there. So, and then that is the first division for Kevin. Notice we began it, we ended it. Then box 1, we've said, make it opacity 75% or 0.75. If you guys don't know, opacity is the opposite of transparency. So we're saying we want to see this box, we want to see 75% of this box. We want to see 25% of what's behind it, or let 25% of what's behind it come forward to our eye. So we need it to be 25% transparent or 75% opaque. So they're opposites. So yep, we want it to have an absolute position. So absolute position means that no matter what, it's going to be in the same place every single time. It's not going to float around. It's not going to be in different things in relation to what's around it. It's just going to be in the same place every time. And that place, that absolute position, needs to be 2% down the page, which isn't very much. That's this little 2% line right here. It needs to be 100 pixels from the left margin. It needs to have a navy background color. The text needs to be centered in it, and then the box needs to be 10 pixels around the text. So you have a 10 pixel sort of window there. So that is box 1. I'm going to pause there for a second and encourage you to pause the video, because if you did not have this box and those commands right there, 7 commands right there, this is your chance to pause the video and make sure you have it. While you pause the video, or if you've unpaused it now, I'd encourage you to play around with these attributes. So play around and see what 50% opacity looks like. Don't play around with this one. Position absolute's very important for what we're doing. So don't play around with line 17 there. But play around with the top. Play around with the pixels. In fact, we can change this to a percent too. We can change that to 5% and see where it lands. Right, it pulled it over there. So now we can do, well, we didn't really want it there, so we could say 15%, and it goes there. So that could be a percent or a pixel. So play around with those. Try pixels, try percent. Background color, you know, many of you played around with that last week. Text alignment, you have left, center, right, so you could do that. And then padding, play around with padding, see what happens. So, but that's your box. So now that we've reviewed last week, and hopefully that helped you a little bit, remember we're still on our CSS page, I'm going to teach you now how to make a menu pane. And there are 3 steps to it, and it's a little bit complicated, so once again, feel free to pause me as I go. For a menu pane, we are going to create a new division called a menu pane, but actually we're going to now use what's called a class. And the difference between a division and a class is a class begins with a period. That lets the computer program know this is a class. Division, you are defining a new tag. With a class, you are defining an attribute of a tag. So we're going to create a new class called menu pane. And you can create classes of classes of classes of classes. And so we're just going to say dot menu pane. And then remember, we're going to open up the division. We do not need a semicolon here because it is the name of a class or a division. And we're basically going to create a box. So to save time for this video, I'm just going to copy and paste my menu pane attributes over from this other page over here. So, and then I'll talk you through them. Notice they're similar to what's above. right? So we still have a position. We had a position up here. We have a position down here. The position's still absolute. This time I said I wanted it 50% down the page. Now that's too much, but the reason I did that was so it looked good down here. You're going to want to play around with that quite a bit. If your title box, your box 1 up here, is 15%, 2% down the page, you might get away with like a 10% here. In fact, I'm going to change that to 10%. I want it to start 10 pixels over from the side of the page. I'm going to change that to 1%. I'm going to change that to 5%. I'm going to give it a Dodger blue background color. You could give it whatever background color you want. And then I'm defining the width and the height of it. If you don't do that, they'll be automatic. But I'm saying I want it 900 pixels long, which is super long. But basically I'm saying I want it to fill the whole page. I want it to go all clear the way over here. I want it to be 50 pixels high. I want it to have 10 pixel padding. And I want it to be 50 pixels over from the left. And I want a margin of 10. I think that's supposed to say pixels there. So I'm going to pause again right there for a second. You can pause the video and have all that. Okay, now that you've probably unpaused, and make sure you typed all that in. Now, let me show you how this works. So now let me go back over to my index page. Remember, completely different language, right? HTML does not use CSS. You don't need things here. You don't need the semicolons and divisions. All those go down here. HTML is just your simple language where you're just starting the divisions and ending your divisions, which we all talked about. So now I've added a menu pane. Let's see what happens when I run it. Nothing happened. Why? Why isn't there a menu pane there? Stop and ask yourself that question. Why isn't there a menu pane there? It's because I've only defined the menu page on my reference sheet down here. I have not actually made the menu pane over here. So now notice, though, that things are really ugly right here, right? Like you can barely read these things unless you highlight them. So I'm going to clean up this page a bit. And if you were doing this from last week's, clean it up a little bit. In fact, I'm just going to delete everything except box 1. So I'm going to go down to box 1. So I have my title, I have my link to my CSS page, line 5 there is very important. I have my begin my body, and then inside the body of the page, create box 1, use the Kevin font that we defined over here, once again, capital K, because it's capital K over here, and then say hello world, and Kevin, and box, and body, and HTML. Now when I run it, all that gunk will disappear from behind the hello world box. And it still doesn't look all that great, partly because of that, also partly because we're just playing around and it's supposed to look awful. So, so now we're going to create the menu pane. So in HTML, we have said start the body, put a box inside of it, use the Kevin font, and say hello world. Now we're going to add the menu pane. So now we're going to say class equals dot menu pane. And I'm just going to double check that off my draft over here. I'm pretty sure that's what we want to say. Oh, sorry, it's division class equals menu pane. You need the div there to say I'm starting a new division. So div class equals menu pane. Bam. And then now we can put whatever text we want to inside our menu pane. We can say page 2. And then we could say page 3. And then we could say page 4. Now, when we run it, these things will be jammed up all together inside. Oh, we didn't end our menu pane, so we should probably do that. And then down here, we just say end the last division that you began. So we don't need to say end division class equals menu pane because they will look and know. So hopefully that didn't make it appear. So go figure. Yep, you don't need the dot. You don't need the dot. Yeah, there we go. You don't need the dot. Now notice that the menu pane, whose position is absolute, goes right over the top of the hello world. The way we fix that is we go back to our CSS page. And now we said we want it 10% down the page. Let's change that to a 20 and see where it ends up. Oh, 20 is still probably not enough. So let's go 30. and 30% is almost perfect. We do have a big margin, but we're not seeing the whole page there. And notice it put page 2, page 3, page 4 on the same line. And we can't click on them at all. So the next thing we want to do is we want to create these in a list. That way they won't all appear together. So in CSS, we want to create now a list division. And so what that looks like, it's over here. We're going to create an unordered list division. And once I copy it over, I'll explain to you guys, just for the sake of time, I'm just copying and pasting it. So we're going to use the list style type attribute. We're going to say none. That basically means we don't want bullet points. So unordered lists automatically defaults to bullet points. This line turns them off. Then we want it to have a 5-pixel margin, the list too, no padding, and the font size 20 pixels. So we just said anything that's an unordered list, we want to look like these 4 things, right? Then the next thing we want to do, remember a list is 2 HTML tags. You have to define that a list is happening, and then you have to find each list item. So the next thing we want is we want anything that's a list, we want it to float. I'll explain what that means in a little bit. And then anything that's a list type that also has an anchor tag, we want it to display in block letters. We want it to be white font, center aligned, and have a 10-point padding. And then we want to create a hover over our list items and add a blue when we hover over it and leave the color white. So we've actually created 3 divisions there. And I'll stop right here so you can pause that and type all of this into your tutorial. Okay, now that you've unpaused me, let me talk through them again. So float means they're going to float in the box. They're not going to be kind of in the top left corner with margin and padding, but they're going to float in the middle. So anything that's a list item, which is LI, is going to float. Anything that is linked to anything using an anchor tag is going to have a block around it. So color is going to be white. It's going to be center aligned inside that block, and it's going to have 10 padding. And then when I hover over it with the mouse, it's going to turn blue, and the text color is still going to be white. So let me show you what this looks like now over here. So now we've created a menu pane, right, with page 2, page 3, page 4. Now we're going to add a list, and we're going to add an anchor tag linking to each page. This is going to take some time, but that's okay. Oh. So what I've just done is I've said, make a list item inside our menu pane. Oh, actually, you know what else I need to do is start an unordered list. So I'm saying start an unordered list in my menu pane. The first list item is going to link to page 2, and we're going to end the link and end the list item. And then we're going to do the same thing with page 3. I'm just going to copy this and paste it twice. And then obviously change this to a 3, this to a 4, change this to a 3, and this to a 4. So now, and then I have to end my unordered list, and then end the menu pane division, and then end the body. Now when I run, fingers crossed, never quite works the first time as we learned earlier, but it did work. Now I have a really cool menu pane. Now I have page 2, and when I hover over it, it turns blue. When I hover over page 3, when I hover over page 4. Earlier, last week, we made all this stuff, right? And then there we go. And then script, don't worry about. And then there's our thing. So now, when I click on page 2, it's not found. Wonder why that. Oh, no. Oh, because I have to say .html. Sorry about that, guys. I told you it never works the first time. There's always something you forgot. So, of course, it's not going to find any of those. Okay, now when I run it, there you go. Welcome to page 2. And now that I've set all that up, the last step, guys, is really, really easy. I just copy all this, right? just copy it, and then in page 2, I just put it in the body underneath box 1. Make sure you put it in the right spot, right? So now when I run it, it'll take me to the index page, but page 2 will now have my menu pane. So I could do the same thing on page 3 and page 4. So just make sure you put it under the box. I'm going to delete that from page 3. Delete that real quick. I don't have the box on page 3 apparently. But I could just copy and paste, and then I just have to make a few changes because I'm not on the index page anymore. I'm going to change my index to home page so that it's actually, I did on page 3, so that when I run and I go to page 3, I can click back to the home page. You guys see that? So you just have to do little changes like that as you go. But once you have it set up, you can just copy and paste it across your whole page, and it will put your nice little menu pane on every page. And you have a nice cool looking thing. When you hover over it, it turns blue, which is classy if you ask me, and you have a nice menu pane. So I know this video is already long. We've covered quite a bit, but let me just go back over the CSS page again so you understand what's going on. So once again, don't forget your curly brackets and your semicolons. So we created a class called Menupane with a dot. And so over on HTML, we have to say division class equals Menupane. Forget the dot. Remember earlier I put the dot in, it didn't work. We've said put the Menupane in absolute position. We've positioned it to the top and left. We've given it a background color. We've declared a width and a height, which will be absolute. They will not change no matter how many items are in this thing. We've padded it twice, and we've given it a margin. And then we've said anything that's an unordered list, don't put bullet points there. We've given it margin, padding, and font size. Then we've said any item in a list, float it to the left. That puts it kind of, you see how it's floating there in the middle of its own box. And then anything that's an item with a link or an anchor tag, do a block around it. The color should be white. Center it and give it padding. And then we've created a hover attribute too that says when we hover over it, turn it blue. That's the background color blue, and keep it white font. So all of that gives you a really cool little menu pane that you can have fun with. And so this week, make sure you put a menu pane on your group's website and some other things, and begin putting that all together. So if you have questions, send me your code. Just remember, you share it with me and you share the link. A few of you have reached out and said, I just can't get it to work, and I've been able to debug it for you in a few moments, and I like doing that. Makes me feel like I'm doing my job as a teacher, and I like helping you guys out and helping you figure out what you did wrong. So make sure you keep doing that. So hopefully this has been helpful, and we're on our way to a cool web page. So I'm looking forward to seeing what you guys do. Have a great week.